Hello and welcome everybody to another edition of the Saturdays are for the Byzantines podcast. My name is Professor Wren. I am your host. Apologies this week for bringing the main lecture to you on Sunday instead of Saturday. Kind of defeats the purpose of the title of the show. Saturday, I was taking a certification exam for another add-on my teaching certificate, which was a little redundant. Maybe none of you care about this, but when I was in college to become, I'm a history teacher. There in the United States where I'm from, there's two types of history certifications, and one's newer and one's a little older and more established. And at the college where I went, they told us to take the newer certification and to not worry too much about the older one. Well, it turns out as you go out and you start applying for jobs, I come to find that the other certification is asked for more often, and so I had to go take that because you apply to jobs and they say, well, we don't take the particular certification you have anyway. But I was doing that yesterday afternoon. It's like a 2-hour test. It was pretty easy. When you do lectures on Byzantine history, a high school history teacher certification exam is not exactly difficult, but it took a while, and just kind of when you get done with long tests like that, you're just kind of mentally a little tired, and I figured I would push off the lecture until today. So, and before we get started on the lecture, if you have found this video, please make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and other podcast platforms. So if you're listening on there, please give us a follow, and if you can, a 5-star review. Now, also, yes, we have surpassed 1,000 total views on YouTube, which is really cool. I appreciate all of you guys watching and listening, and I'm not sure exactly what the podcast numbers are right now, but they're getting better. They're not amazing, but they are improved. Every time I go on, there is an improvement in the numbers in the podcast, although there are definitely more people watching on YouTube than are listening to the podcast. But either way, regardless of how you're consuming this podcast, I want to say thank you for listening. Thank you. If you're someone who leaves comments, thank you for those as well. That helps us defeat the evil YouTube algorithm. And so, yeah, I'm glad that there are people out there who want to hear what I have to say about this, because I really enjoy talking about this. Now, where we last left our story, we were talking about Belisarius's attempted reconquest of the Western Roman Empire under the authority of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian. And when we last left our story, the Byzantines had taken back North Africa, much of Italy, the island of Sicily as well, for those of you who make a distinction between Italians and Sicilians, which if you're Sicilian, you are, and probably if you're Italian, you are as well. They've taken Corsica and Sardinia, and also parts of Spain, what they would call back then Iberia. But Belisarius had to cut the Italian campaign short because, really, Justinian wanted to cut the campaign short because war was brewing in the east with the Persians, as the Byzantine, going to war as the Byzantines and Persians are wont to do, seemingly at least once a decade. And so Justinian had to wrap up the war in the west so that he could divert more resources to the east and get his best general, Belisarius, to the east as well. But Belisarius was not super happy about that. He thought that he could have finished the campaign, and instead of being able to completely wipe out the Ostrogoth, or the Ostrogothic kingdom, I should say, what the deal that they came to was that the Ostrogoths could hold on to their kingdom north of the Po River, and that the Romans would hold on to everything south of the Po River. Belisarius thought that if he just had a little more time and maybe a little bit more resources, he could have finished the Ostrogothic kingdom off for good. which in hindsight probably maybe would have been a better idea, because now as soon as Belisarius leaves to go to the east, the Goths select a new king. So we talked about Vidigus or Vidigus, if you want to say it like that. But Vidigus was the king of the Ostrogoths when we were talking last time, in our last lecture here. But after Belisarius departs, the Ostrogoths decide to select a new king, and this guy's name is Totila, not to be confused with tortillas, the delicious Mexican flatbread wrap, sometimes made from corn and sometimes made from flour. I prefer flour tortillas myself, but can't go wrong with a good corn tortilla. Now, after Belisarius leaves, in Italy, obviously there has to be a garrison left behind. There's generals who are in charge of garrisons and armies and those sorts of things. And as we brought up last time, towards the end of Belisarius's time in Italy, there started to become a bit of a rift among the subordinate generals in the army, in no small part due to some conflict between Belisarius and another general named Narses. Narses was an Armenian. He was a eunuch, so presumably a high-pitched voice, but a very competent general. And during the campaign, there were some disagreements between Narses and Belisarius. Narses had came in kind of later on. He wasn't there from the beginning. Belisarius obviously has been there since the start. And through some of their disagreements about tactics and approach and these sorts of things, which you can go back and listen to in our previous episode, there were some generals who took the side of Belisarius, and there were other generals who took the side of Narses, which led to, like I said, kind of a rift in the officer chain of command, subordinate generals, whatever you want to call them, in the Byzantine army. And that kind of division and infighting seems to have continued after Belisarius leaves, because after Belisarius leaves, you get a good deal of kind of arguing and bickering with the generals who are remaining in Italy. And one of the things they attempt to do is they're going to try to expand past where the treaties had set up the borders. The treaty that excuse me, the treaty that Justinian had agreed to with the Ostrogoths of the Po River being the border between the Ostrogothic kingdom and the Byzantine Empire in Italy. Now, the Roman generals wanted to expand over the border into northern Italy across the Po River, and the city they had their eyes on was Verona. The issue being that their siege of Verona was a failure, and not only that, but Totila then, after the siege is lifted, goes on a counterattack against the Romans, which destroys that army, opening the door for Totila and the Ostrogoths to go back down further south into Italy where they previously had been. And the Ostrogoths managed to make their way through the Italian countryside. They do not bother so much, or perhaps a better way to say it is I don't think they think they have the capacity to siege and take or starve out the walled cities in Italy at the time, which still have Byzantine garrisons. But whatever the reason for this, the Goths basically skip over the cities and mostly go through the countryside and the small towns, and that is what they're so the Byzantines are left with a lot of major cities like Ravenna, Rome, Naples, these sorts of places, while the Ostrogoths reclaim a lot of the countryside. Now, an important thing to note here, and this is this is going to be something to kind of keep in the back of our minds as we go forward, is that now, and in previous episodes, I had said that a lot of the people, the common, citizens, and even local nobility of many of the places that Belisarius has been reconquering, is that many of these people probably think of themselves still as Romans, or at least of Roman ancestry. Certainly, even people who were descendants of Romans in like the Vandalic kingdom didn't think of themselves as Vandals, because they weren't Vandals. They weren't Germanic. And so I talked about how a lot of them probably saw Belisarius coming in as a welcome thing. Here I am. I'm a Roman. I'm a Chalcedonian Christian. I speak Latin at home with my family. When we go to mass, it's in Latin. My grandfather always talked about how much better it was to be ruled by the Romans than these smelly barbarians. And so they probably, I think a lot of these people probably welcome Belisarius with open arms. However, especially in Italy, this is more so the case in Italy than anywhere else that Belisarius reconquers, is that once we're going to get into this back and forth tug of war going on between the Ostrogoths and the Byzantines in Italy, a lot of the Roman, and maybe you could say more broadly speaking, Italian citizenry, both peasants and nobility, they're gonna kind of get this sour taste in their mouth about the Byzantines. It's like, you showed up with your army, you took over, talked about how things were going to be real good, and then you left, and then you weren't able to defend the city, and the Ostrogoths are back in here now, and sure, you might come back with an army later on, but how long are you going to be around that time around or next time around? Because I remember last time around, and it didn't go that well for you or me or anyone else involved. The other thing is as well, a couple of other things just to note as to reasons for tensions going on in Italy at this point in time. Number one is that the new Byzantine tax regime is viewed as very oppressive by the Italian citizenry. And I don't know, saying Italian to describe them, it's not Italian like we think of Italians today. Maybe Latin or Roman would be a better descriptor here. But either way, the new Byzantine tax system is viewed as oppressive and is not exactly run as well as it should be. Another thing to keep in mind is a lot of soldiers in Italy are not getting paid at this point in time. They're going to go quite a while without receiving a paycheck, which, as we all know, is a big issue. It's a big old red flag, because soldiers are not going to risk their lives to defend your land if you are not paying them. Okay. So we talked about, right, so the Goths start pushing into Italy. The Roman Latin citizenry is dissatisfied with the Romans because they can't hold on to onto their possession. They can't defend them, basically. And if you can't, if you are a state that can't defend its citizens, you don't have the respect of the citizens, because part of the social contract in any state is that, citizens give up certain rights and freedoms in exchange for protection from the state, right? Especially, and a lot of this we're talking about physical protection from the state. And the other thing too is that in the instances where there are sieges and where the Goths do take over towns, they offer favorable terms of surrender, not just to the citizens of the cities, but also to the Roman garrisons. And there are several instances. One of the most notable one in Procopius here is in Naples, where the Ostrogoths offer to let the Byzantine garrison just go. Really return to Constantinople, not like, go back out into the field and join up with Belisarius, who again is in Persia at this point in time. but they allow them to basically, from Naples, get on your boats, because Naples is a port city, and sail back to Constantinople. And now I'm going to read a bit here from Procopius. And again, the version of, this is The Wars of Justinian by Procopius. This is the Hackett Classic version, originally translated by H.B. Dewing and revised and modernized by Anthony Caldelis of Ohio State University. I believe Dewing was of Harvard, at least at one point in his life. I don't know if he was at Harvard when he translated this, but most notably he was from Harvard. Now this is Procopius describing the situation that, and the path that Totila decided to take after he beat back the Roman invasion, which went north of the Po River. And he starts making a bit of a push down there into Tuscany and Campania. But here we have, after this, and this, by the way, so this is The Wars of Justinian. This is Book 7, Chapter 6, Verse 2. After this, he decided to besiege Naples because the inhabitants, in spite of his many winning words, were unwilling to have him. Totila essentially tries to convince the people in Naples to surrender the city. And he offers them, like I said, he offers some pretty favorable terms, but they don't go along with it. For Conon was keeping guard there with a force of 1,000 Romans and Isaurians. Totila himself, with the greater part of the army, made camp not far from the fortifications and remained quiet, but he sent off a party of the army and captured the fortresses of Cumae and certain other strongholds, from which he succeeded in gathering great sums of money. Now, skipping down here a bit to verse 7, still in chapter 6, book 7. Because of this situation, the Italians, on the one hand, having been evicted from their property and finding themselves for the second time in grave peril, were beginning to feel extreme grief, while the soldiers, on the other hand, were becoming increasingly insubordinate to their commanders and were content to remain inside the cities. Again, so we're talking about, and this is not just Naples here, but, no, this is Naples. But it's talking about how, this is more than Naples. I apologize, but right, the citizens are getting antsy, as well as a lot of these garrisons are getting antsy because they're, a lot of these garrisons are fairly small too. We're talking about between 1,000 and 3,000 men guarding what are pretty sizable cities, and the Ostrogoths coming down with at least, I'm assuming their armies are at least of 10,000, possibly more. Well, and I would say probably more as well. But the Romans, they don't just lose Naples, but they also lose Apulia, they lose Calabria. There's a pizza restaurant in the town over from where I grew up called Calabria's. They had very good pizza. Totally unrelated, but I read Calabria, and I thought of Calabria's pizza. And so what's left? It says these various generals, Constantinos, Constantianos was holding Ravenna, Ioannis, Rome, Bessus, Spoleto, Justinos, Florence, and a couple of others. Justinos, this is just the Greek version of Justin, I'm assuming, because Caldelis has all of the names in this as Greek names instead of Latin names. But here's a description of this is book 7, chapter 8, verse 17. This is a speech. Well, after a speech that Totila gives to the people of Naples after a siege has been going on for a while. And it says, "Thus spoke Totila, and both the Neapolitans and all the soldiers under Conon expressed their approval. For the sharp necessity of the famine was pressing them hard, right? Because they're running low on food. Naples has been sieged on land and blockaded from sea. However, to guard their allegiance to the emperor, and still expecting that some assistance would come to them, they agreed to give up the city after 30 days. Totila, wishing to dispel from their minds every hope of assistance from the emperor, set a time of 3 months, on condition that they would then do what had been agreed. He declared that before then he would make no assault on the wall or employ any stratagem of any kind against them. The agreement was approved on these terms. So basically, Totila gives them he kind of gives them an eviction notice. Say, get out by this date or else, and that does happen. And that is happening in 543. It's 543 that Totila is taking Naples. Now, when this happens, the war with the Persians kind of has a bit of a cold spell in it, and Belisarius is going to be sent back west to try to deal with this situation. However, there is a bit of a rift now between Justinian and Belisarius. It seems, the two are not exactly thrilled with each other, I think, in no small part because when Justinian wanted to end the war against the Ostrogoths, as I said, Belisarius wasn't happy with this, and he wanted to continue the war. And both of these guys are pretty high-level alpha figures, and when you have two alphas butting heads like that, there's going to be some natural resentment that continues on between them. But Procopius tells us here, this is book 7, chapter 10, verse 10. Thus Belisarius for a second time went to Italy, but as he had an extremely small number of soldiers, for it was impossible for him to detach his own retinue from the army in Persia, he went around the whole of Thrace, offering money to gather fresh volunteers. By imperial command, he was accompanied by Vitalios, the general of Illyria, who had recently returned from Italy, where he had left the Illyrian soldiers, and so on and so forth. So Belisarius is trying to gather some troops here because the army he's been given to go back west is very small. And eventually it says that he arrives in Ravenna, but at the same time, he does not actually do anything while he is there. Now this, jumping ahead a little bit here, this is book 7, chapter 12, verse 12. Now Belisarius, finding himself utterly unable to support the besieged towns, because also at this point, after a while, Totila kind of realizes that the Romans don't have a strong hold on Italy, and so after he's gotten done going through the countryside, he starts besieging cities as well. But so anyways, Belisarius sent Ioannis, nephew of Vitalianos, to Byzantion, and when he says Byzantion, he's referring to Constantinople here, binding him by the most solemn oaths to make every effort to return as quickly as possible, and his mission was to beg the emperor to send a large army and much money, and furthermore, both arms and horses. But for even the few soldiers he had were unwilling to fight, claiming that the state owed them much money and that they themselves lacked everything. And this was true, says Procopius. But however, unfortunately, he sends this Ioannis guy over to Constantinople to beg the emperor to send him troops, supplies, money, uh, weapons, horses, all this kind of stuff. And, however, it says, but Ioannis, although he spent a long time in Byzantium, accomplished none of the goals of his mission. Still, he married the daughter of Germanos, the nephew of the emperor. So Ioannis does not get anything done which he was asked to when he went there, but at least he got himself married, which I guess congratulations. Let's see here. And unfortunately, unfortunately for Belisarius, this is not going to be quite the heroic homecoming that I would say we have come to expect from Belisarius so far in this lecture series. I mean, if anything, he's really going to have a rough go of it. If we fast forward here. Procopius tells us, Belisarius returned to Byzantium in disarray. For 5 years, he had not disembarked anywhere on the soil of Italy, nor had he success in making a single march there by land. But he had taken refuge in concealed flight during this whole time, always sailing without interruption from one coastal fort to another stronghold along the shore. So right there, he's telling us that although Belisarius spends 5 years in Italy, having been sent there by Justinian, he accomplishes basically nothing. Because, Belisarius claims that his army is too small, they don't have enough provisions, they don't have enough supplies. You can see that, but at the same time, when he was fighting in Italy before, Procopius reports that he had a fairly small army. He was stretched pretty thin. The constant sieges, one might imagine that they might be low on supplies from time to time. One does not wonder if maybe, he just doesn't want to. He just doesn't want to be there. And that if he is going to go out and fight in this situation, he just wants more. He wants things to be a little easier. Maybe he was worn out last time from the previous campaign. Although Belisarius does very well, but maybe things between him and Justinian are just a little, they're not quite as chummy as they used to be, and perhaps in the past he would have done this for Justinian. But I kind of think there's some sort of riff in the relationship here between these two guys. Now in December, here's I was talking about the tug of war earlier. This is certainly one of the things about the tug of war that went on. So in December 546, Totila enters Rome. He takes Rome, right? So the Ostrogoths have Rome here in December of 546, but then in the spring of 547, which is just a couple months later, Belisarius takes it back. So he does do something, and it's not that Belisarius is completely inactive, but he is mostly inactive. But then soon after, Belisarius is recalled back to the east, and Totila comes back to Rome and takes it again. And then in 549, Totila sieges Rome again. So between 547 and 549, he lost it and sieged it again, comes back, gets back in on account of traders it was actually Isaurian traders who were a part of the Roman garrison, part of the garrison of the city. I believe the commander of the guard's name was Diogenes. And for one reason or another, I do remember reading in Procopius that he mentions these Isaurians were thinking about how other Isurians who had sold out the Romans or gone over to fight with the Goths against the Romans were rich and had lots of nice stuff, and things were pretty good for them. And they basically said to themselves, well, why don't we do that? And they end up opening the gates for the Ostrogoths in Rome, which we will read a little bit of here. Attila then, as soon as it was night, put his whole force under arms in silence and led them near the Asnarian gate. He commanded 4 men who were noted among the Goths for their bravery and strength to climb up with ropes with the Isurians to the battlements. During that part of the night, of course, when the Isurians were supposed to be guarding that portion of the wall, while others took their turn at sleeping. When they got inside the fortifications, they descended to the Asnarian gate without meeting any opposition. There they shattered with axes the wooden beam with which they shut the gates by fitting it into recesses in the wall on either side, and also into the ironwork. And also all the ironwork into which the guards inserted their keys to shut the gates or to open them as needed. So that's how the Goths get into Rome in 549. And again, as I mentioned, this is going to leave a very bad taste in the mouths of the Roman population, the Roman citizenry, whatever you want to call it. The Romans show up with a big game, a good an army, and Belisarius comes through and is very triumphant. But as time goes on, the local population kind of starts to think, well, okay, you're here now, but how long are you going to be here for? And you took back the city, but I remember the last time you took back the city and you lost it, and that's why you had to take it back again. So things are not quite as rosy between the Roman citizens and the Roman army, the armies of Justinian, as they previously had been. And that is going to kind of lead us here to our kind of the final stage here of the Gothic Wars. We have spent a good amount of time with this. We've certainly enjoyed our time here in the Gothic Wars, but they are getting a little long in the tooth, and it is kind of time to bring them to an end here. So in 551, Justinian sends a new force to Italy to try to preserve the situation. To essentially, what's going to end up happening here is they're going to end up in the same situation they were before this kind of Ostrogothic revival that goes on in the 540s. And the goal really is, or what's going to end up happening, is they're just going to get the same situation as how things were before Belisarius went back east to fight the Persians. So a new force is sent to Italy, this time under the command of Narses, who we mentioned earlier, the Armenian general, and he is sent over with somewhere between 20 and 25,000 men. And I'm sure Belisarius is sitting there thinking to himself, well, when I asked for a 20,000 man army, I did not get it. But when Narses is over here and he gets a 25,000 man army, why didn't if I had gotten that, I'd be able to fix the situation as well. But at the same time, Belisarius had his chance to go back to Italy and kind of did not do a ton. Did something, but did not do as much as one would have hoped. Just flipping here in our friend Procopius. Now this is the description of Narses coming to power here, getting this commission. So this is the Wars of Justinian, Book 8, Chapter 21, and we are in verse 6. The emperor here, ordering him, he's talking about Ioannis, to remain there until Narses the eunuch arrived. So to remain in, talking about Salona here, which is a city in Italy, And so Justinian wants Ioannis to stay where he is until Narses arrives, for he had decided to appoint him commander-in-chief in this war. The reason why the emperor had made this decision was explicitly clear to no one in the world. I can just see Procopius kind of sitting there like, nobody knows why this guy was put in charge of this. My best friend Belisarius should have been the one in charge. I am very salty. He goes on to say, it is impossible to know how an emperor's mind, it is impossible to know an emperor's mind unless he wills it, but I will disclose what people are saying based on guesswork. The thought had occurred to the Emperor Justinian that the other commanders of the Roman army would be unwilling to take orders from Ioannis, not consenting to be in any way inferior to him in rank. So from what we kind of gather here, it's an issue of guys not wanting to take orders from certain people, perhaps because that guy's a lower ranking general than me. Why am I getting orders from him? These sorts of things. And Narses has been around for a while. He's very accomplished. He's highly competent, and so perhaps Justinian seemed to think that we need. And as we mentioned before, there were a number of generals in Italy who preferred Narses to Belisarius, and so seemingly this has something to do. And again, Procopius admits here he's speculating, but it does make sense that you want to put, if you're going to have a general in command of a campaign like this, best that all of the other generals who are going to be fighting with him in the situation are going to get along with him and are willing to take commands from him. Now, when Narses first arrives into Italy, he marches from Dalmatia, this would be the modern coast of Croatia, marches north up the coast of the Adriatic, kind of comes around there where the Adriatic has its little like armpit, comes down to Ravenna, and then from Ravenna, Narses is going to make a straight march to Rome, because Rome has changed hands a couple times. Obviously, it's the most important city on the peninsula, and so he's like, all right, let's settle this down before anything else. Now, Narses, or I should say Totila, attempts to surprise attack. Or no, I'm sorry, that's later on. No, so what we have here is the Battle of Taginae, where, apologies, I remember this better now, but Totila was waiting for a certain army of reinforcements to come help him out, to go fight Narses. Some of the reinforcements show up, but not all of them. But he seems to think it's sufficient to go attack him. I think what happens is here he attempts to ambush him, but it's foiled. Later on, Totila is going to attempt to trick Narses by offering to negotiate with him at a battle that we'll talk about here in a minute. Or hold on a minute. No, I apologize. No, yeah, I apologize. No. So I've gotten this totally wrong because I have two battles written down here in front of me, and I'm forgetting that the second battle is not even against the Goths, because really what's going to happen here in 553 is that the Franks and the Alemanni are going to invade Italy after the Ostrogoths are basically taken care of. But that is not included in Procopius' book because it's the book is the Gothic Wars, not the Frankish Wars. But so what's going to happen here? So, like I said, the Battle of Taginae. It's up in the mountains. It seems to be. It's like up in the Apennine Mountains. Just a side note here, but my some of my students, I don't teach all of them history. I don't teach the 7th graders history. They have a different history teacher. And they were going over Roman history, and they were doing Italian geography. And one of the boys was telling me about this mountain range in Italy, and he called it the Apennines. I said to him, do you mean the Apennines? And he goes, no, I think it's pronounced Apennines. And I just kind of sat there and looked at him like, what? Why? Why are you saying that? I don't know. Kids. I hope he wasn't serious. I hope the other history teacher did not tell them that the mountain range is called the Apennines. Anyway, so Narses and Totila are going to meet in battle up in the Apennines. And what is going to, so Totila kind of rushes out to go meet Narses before all of his reinforcements arrive. Most of them are there, but not all of them. I don't think it would have really made a difference either way. And what Totila is going to try to do is he's going to send a messenger to Narses to basically say, let's come to terms, let's negotiate. Narses, to his credit, kind of smells the BS. He's like, this kind of smells fishy to me. We're not going to, tomorrow morning when we go out to quote unquote negotiate, we're going to form up in a battle line, because I think this guy is going to try to pull a fast one on us. And that's exactly what happens. It's exactly what happens. Totila intended to try to get the Romans to come out to negotiate, and then he was going to attack them. So tons of credit to Narses for smelling the fish on that. And I do have to laugh at this one line from Procopius in here, where he talks about how Narses has a lot of the horse archers in his army dismount. He says, so that if by chance they turned coward in the engagement or deserted, they could not flee too quickly. And I'm sure also that, they kind of have in mind here that, well, I guess, if they turn coward and run, the enemy cavalry can chase them down faster. Like, yeah, you want to turn tail and show cowardice? Well, we're not going to give you a horse to run away on, so that the other guy's horses can chase you down and cut you down. There's another interesting part in here. Let me see if I have. I don't know. I didn't underline it, so I'm not going to try to go through and read it. But there's an interesting bit in here about a one-on-one combat between a Roman. Oh, here it is. So this is between a Roman defector and a member of the Roman army. It says, but later on, so there's a standoff. So to kind of give a little context here, the Roman army kind of has it's got a hill advantage in this setup, and so the Ostrogoths don't want to attack the hill, and the Romans don't want to come down off the hill. So there's a long standoff in this battle here. And it says, but Procopius says, this is Book 8, Chapter 31, verse 11. But later on, one man of the Gothic army named Coccus, who had a great reputation as a fighter, rode his horse out, came close to the Roman army, and shouted a challenge if anyone was willing to come out against him in single combat. This Coccus happened to be one of the Roman soldiers who had previously deserted to Totila. You'll notice here that Coccus is definitely not a Germanic name. That's a Greek name. So you can tell, you like, initially when I read this, I was like, that's interesting that he's in the Gothic army and that's his name. Makes sense now that we know that he's a defector. Immediately, one of the spearmen of Narses, and it seems to me that when Procopius uses the word spearman, he's talking about a member of a bodyguard. I've seen the Roman general's bodyguard unit in this time period be referred to as the Bucellari, or if you want to use the Greek pronunciation, the Bucellari. But Narses here apparently is using the term spearman, or sorry, not Narses, Procopius. But so immediately one of the spearmen of Narses stood forth against him, a man of Armenian birth named Anzalis. Sorry, Anzalis, not Anzal, and yeah, Anzalis. I said that right the first time. Who was likewise mounted on a horse. Cocus made the first charge to strike his foe with his spear, aiming the weapon at his belly. But Anzalis, by suddenly turning his horse aside, caused the charge of his enemy to be futile. By this maneuver, he was placed on the enemy's flank, and he now thrust his spear into his left side. Cocus fell from his horse to the ground and lay there dead. A tremendous shout rose from the Roman army, but even then, neither side began any action. And essentially, what happens here in the battle is Narses manages to carry out a classic encirclement tactic against the Ostrogoths here. Totila will end up dying at this battle, and this is really the end of the Ostrogothic kingdom. This is the end of any kind of Ostrogothic resistant. This is there are no Ostrogoths after this. However, you are going to have in 554 there's the Battle of the Volturnus, which is a river near where the battle took place. Apparently also took place near Capua. Sometimes this is also called the Battle of Capua. And Narses does defeat this combined army of the Franks and the Alemanni here as well. And for the time being, like I said, the situation which had previously been agreed to, where and it's really not the Ostrogoths who are going to be in northern Italy after this. Really going to be more of the Franks. But the Byzantines are going to control everything in Italy south of the Po River and not have anything to the north of it. And that is the end of the Gothic Wars here. This is the end of our story with our friend Belisarius. It's been a fun journey. I really do think Belisarius is incredibly underrated as a Roman general. Really, I think he should be considered the greatest Roman general, considering Julius Caesar and Trajan certainly get up there, but I think especially when you consider that Belisarius is accomplishing things equally as impressive, if not more impressive, than Trajan and Caesar, and he's doing it with less resources, only drawing on the resources from half an empire. He's always fighting on enemy terrain. He's never fighting on home soil. He's doing it with less men oftentimes, and frequently outnumbered as well. And so I think really underrated. Really, you never hear, when you hear people talk about great Roman generals, you rarely hear them say Belisarius, and I think that's a real disservice to him, because, like I say, I think I would say he's the greatest Roman general, even better than Caesar, even better than Trajan, just because of the situations they were in. Trajan and Caesar had a lot more working in their favor than I would say Belisarius had. But so that is going to be the end of today's lecture. Our next lecture, we will wrap up Justinian. We will talk a bit about his building projects and his legal codex. That'll probably be a fairly short lecture. I would be surprised if that went longer than 30 minutes. And then after that, we'll just keep pressing on in Byzantine history. Things are not going to look good after this. We are, the Romans are going to only hold on to Italy for a brief while, and it's not going to be long until the Lombards come in and take over most of Italy. The Byzantines will hold on to Sicily for a while. They'll hold on to parts of southern Italy for a while, but they'll lose those as well to Lombards, Normans, and Saracens. And it's not going to be long here as well until we get to the rise of Islam, and that's really when the downward spiral begins in Byzantine history. Is when Islam enters the world stage. But we can enjoy the fun and positive parts of Byzantine history while we still can, and then we can all kind of be sad together as we watch the slow death of the Byzantine Empire. First semester Byzantine history, when I took it in college, first semester was the good semester. That was when all the fun and positive things were happening. The Byzantines were doing well, and then second semester is just leaves you in a state of manic depression because things are so bad. But that's all the time we have for today. If you made it this far in the video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Google Play or any other podcast platform, please make sure to give us a follow and a 5-star review if that's something the platform. I don't know if you can leave reviews on Google Play, but I know you definitely can on Apple. And then you can also check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Professor Wren. So that's all I have for you today, and I'll see y'all next time.